Good evening. I call this May 1st meeting of the James City County Planning Commission to order. Mr. Holt, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dowdy, who represents the Stonehouse District, is not yet with us. Ms. Leverins.
Here.
Ms. Leverins is an at-large member. Mr. Polster.
Here.
Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District. Mr. O'Connor.
Here.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member. Mr. Schmidt.
Here.
Mr. Schmidt represents the Roberts District. Mr. Kropp is representing the Powhatan District and is this year's vice chair, could not be with us this evening. Mr. Haldeman.
Here.
Mr. Haldeman represents the Berkeley District and is this year's chair. I'm Paul Holt, Director of Community Development and Planning for the county, and sitting to my left is Mr. Max Halavin, our Deputy County Attorney. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We now have time for public comment. Public comment is for topics not subject to a public hearing later on in the evening. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. We don't have any speaker cards, but if anybody would, or maybe we do. No, okay. If anybody would like to speak, please approach the podium. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Sorry?
Only for items that are not related to a public hearing. So if it's one of the items under F1 or 2, yeah, it's not for those yet, just yet.
Consent agenda items are determined to be non-controversial. Excuse me, I beg your pardon, I skipped one. Reports of the commission. Mr. Polster is this year's chair of the Development Review Committee. Mr. Polster.
The Development Review Committee met 4 p.m. on April 17, 2019. Mr. Haldeman, Mr. Schmidt, and I were present to hear and provide preliminary input and questions on a proposed assisted living facility project. That case number was C19-00302, Colonial Heritage Commercial Property Design Guidelines and Conceptual Plan. In attendance for the project was the applicant, Mr. Jesse Young and Alfred J. Shrives from Virginia Health Services, Mr. Mark Richards from the Timmons Group, Mr. Roque from the Leonard, and Mr. Jeff Stodgill from J. Scruggs from PMA, and Juan Carlos Morgado, a civil engineer too, for the County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division. The applicant had requested that the item be placed on the DRC agenda in order to seek preliminary input and questions from the DRC members. No decision was required, and the project would return to the DRC after staff had finalized the project design guidelines. The DRC heard a presentation from the applicant's architect and also looked at the project's preliminary conceptual design and master plan for the assisted living facility. Staff reported that the open space requirements were met by the entire Colonial Heritage, which includes the Land Base 6, the site of the assisted living facility. The stormwater representative expressed that a master stormwater plan for the project's future development on the portion closer to Richmond Road and future wing of the facility should be considered. Design guidelines for the assisted living facility are a compilation of design guidelines from previous county projects that the planning director has on record. Staff will provide the committee members with a copy of the guidelines. The applicant based the number of parking spaces on their experience at other facilities. No plans have been made to provide charging stations for electrical vehicles. Mr. Polster asked the applicant if they had considered green building techniques for the facility, accommodation for staffing given the low amount of affordable housing for their CNAs, and providing transportation for staff living outside of the area. The applicant acknowledged the challenge of recruiting and keeping workers in the region and discussed the company's approach in recruiting, training, and transporting staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Leverins is this year's chair of the Policy Committee. Ms. Leverins.
Thank you. Policy Committee report for April 11th, 2019. Committee members present were Jack Haldeman, Rich Kropp, Julia Leverins. Staff members present were Darrell Cook, Ellen Cook, Max Halavin, Paul Holt, John Reisinger, Thomas Wysong, and Mike Wilson. The meeting came to order at 4:15 p.m. In response to a Board of Supervisors initiating resolution, Mr. Thomas Wysong introduced draft regulations to protect the public water supply and areas of public health and water quality sensitivity. The committee reviewed the proposed regulations, along with regulations in place in Newport News and York County. During discussion, the committee agreed on several changes and asked staff to incorporate them for review at the next Policy Committee meeting. In response to an earlier BOS initiating resolution, which had been discussed at 3 previous policy committee meetings, Mr. Paul Holt presented amended wording regarding master plan consistency determinations. The committee agreed that the proposed language, which would be added to sections 24-23, 24-276, and 24-516, addresses the intent of the board's resolution. And the language is, I quote, "Any development plan that proposes significant changes in dwelling unit location, dwelling unit counts, and/or dwelling unit type over that shown on the adopted master plan shall be submitted and approved in accordance with Section 24-13, and such decisions by the planning director are not subject to appeal to the DRC." End quote. However, because of committee members' concerns expressed at this and previous meetings, the committee voted to forward the amended ordinance to the full Planning Commission for review without a recommendation. Concerns included the small number of past cases which would have been subject to this amendment and the increased obstacles that it would present to holders of approved master plans. Meeting was adjourned at 5:20.
Thank you very much. And now the consent agenda. Consent agenda items are determined to be non-controversial. However, a planning commissioner may pull any item for discussion. The only item on tonight's agenda are approval of the minutes of the April 3rd, 2019 regular meeting. Would anybody like to pull this item? Further discussion? May I please have a motion to approve?
I'll move the minutes of April 3rd, 2019 of the regular meeting be approved.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next up, public hearings. The first on the agenda is SUP-19-0009, 4897 Longhill Road, King of Glory Lutheran Church expansion. Mr. Leininger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Mr. Chase Grogg of Land Tech Resources has applied for a special use permit to allow for an expansion of 19,000 square feet to the existing church building. The new expansion will include 4,604 square foot sanctuary to seat 500 to 550 people at the King of Glory site located at 4897 Long Hill Road. The property is zoned R2, general residential, and designated low density residential in the 2035 comprehensive land use map. The property is located inside the primary service area. Surrounding development includes Ford's Colony, Windsor Forest, Williamsburg Plantation, and Wellspring United Methodist Church. The new facility will include administrative offices, a nursery, gathering spaces, and an enlarged kitchen. The existing sanctuary will be remodeled into 6 classrooms for the preschool. The expanded facility will allow for more flexibility for the proposed Neighborhood Resource Center. This proposal will add an additional parking spaces to support all 3 uses: a place of public assembly, a school, and a neighborhood resource center is a specially permitted use in the R2 zoning district. Currently, King of Glory utilizes Founders Hall and the existing sanctuary for 3 services each Sunday. The church currently provides preschool for students ages 2 through 6. There are 220 parking spaces existing on the site. This proposal will increase the parking spaces and add 155 more spaces. In total, there will be 375 parking spaces. The existing parking lot will be brought closer into conformance with the current zoning ordinance regulations, and existing parking spaces will be removed from the community character corridor buffer, and the buffer will be increased by 368 square feet. Previously, this property received multiple SCPs from 2000 to 2012, and those SCPs allowed for the construction of modular buildings, purchase adjacent property to expand their use, and to expand the church previously. Improvements included in the Long Hill Road corridor widening project will mitigate the additional traffic impacts associated with this proposal. VDOT has reviewed and recommended approval, and that there be continued coordination between the 2 projects. Staff finds the proposal to be compatible with the surrounding development and consistent with the 2035 comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. Staff recommends the Planning Commission recommend approval to the Board of Supervisors, subject to the proposed conditions. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm here, and the applicant is here as well.
Questions?
It may have missed it in the report, but a lot of additional parking spaces, of course, and was wondering, are entirely going to be paved, or I know there's some gravel there now, and it'll be
Yeah,
changed?
the gravel portion will be removed, and it'll be all paved.
Thank you.
Question. And this also may be part of the package. Is there a provision for a sidewalk, or is that part of the road widening?
Yes, there is a shared multi-use path included with the widening of Longhill.
Thanks.
I just have two. The height of the churches, you're comfortable that it'll be within the height restrictions, including the steeple and
Correct. So for a church spire, they can be up to 60, a normal building's up to 35 feet, and then the spire can be up to 60 feet without a height waiver.
comfortable with that. The other one, where is the Neighborhood Resource Center? I couldn't find it on the
So the
schematic.
existing school currently uses those spaces for the Neighborhood Resource Center, and then they will be just utilizing the fellowship hall, or the Founders Hall
Founders Hall, that's the,
as
okay, the
meeting
Resource Center.
spaces.
Great, thank you. Any disclosures by the planning commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to open the public hearing. Does applicant like to make a presentation, or? Don't have to. Any questions from the commissioners? Anybody, any speakers? Would anybody like to speak to this issue? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Discussion?
Well, I'll just repeat the fact that I was a little surprised that the master plan didn't require the stormwater facilities, and I understand that it is going to help it happen at the site plan. And I did pick up on the comment from the stormwater folks about the dry swell not functioning quite well, and then the BMP also not functioning. And I'm hoping that with all that additional roofing for the new church, and with the number of parking spaces, and given the slope of the terrain, at least at that end, it's going to go into the RPA, that we'll have a nice solution for the stormwater facilities. The last comment, I'm also hoping that the widening of the Longhill will help that problem, since the BMP that's at the end there actually drains into the VDOT ditch. And I noticed that the plans for the Longhill widening, that across that intersection with west is where where it drops down into Chisel Run, which is where they're going to put the new BMP. So I hope between the widening and the consideration for the new parking lot, that they do a good job in terms of handling that amount of rainwater coming off of the roof in the parking lots.
Other? Please have a motion.
Move approval of SUP 19-0009, 4897 Long Hill Road, King of Glory, Lutheran Church expansion.
With conditions, right?
With
Is that
conditions.
to, yeah,
Right.
just for clarification of the motion, that would include the staff recommended conditions in the staff report.
Correct.
There's a motion on the floor. Ms. Leverins?
Aye.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt?
Aye.
And Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. Item number 2, Z-19-0007 and MP-18-0004, Forest Heights Proffer and Master Plan Amendments. Mr. Weissong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening to the Commission. Mr. Doug Harbin of Wayne Harbin Builder Incorporated has applied on behalf of the Salvation Army to amend the existing proffers and master plan for the Forest Heights area to allow for up to 46 townhouses, a self-storage facility, and a residential caretaker unit to be located on the 11.42-acre property that is currently owned by the Salvation Army. Now, this property is located within the primary service area of James City County and is recommended for low-density residential use within the comprehensive plan. Now, to give a little bit of history on this area, the county actually initiated a rezoning back in 2011 of the Forest Heights area. And the purpose of this rezoning was twofold. First, the county was interested in facilitating improvements to the existing Forest Heights neighborhood. These improvements included things like paving existing roads, rehabilitating the existing housing stock, providing for stormwater management controls, and also helping property owners figure out property lines to bring into conformance with the zoning ordinance. The second goal of this rezoning was to permit the Salvation Army to pursue some non-residential uses on their property in furtherance of their mission. These uses included a community space, a gym, and some new offices. As of today, those uses have not been developed. So the applicant is putting forward that 100% of the proposed 46 townhouses will be offered as affordable housing, and this exceeds the 20% requirement that we have within the county's housing opportunities policy. The applicant has also provided cash proffers in accordance with the contribution policy that is current with the 2019 fee schedule, and has also provided cash in lieu of some of the parks and recreational facilities that were not able to be located on site because of site constraints. As part of this application, the applicant has also put forward design guidelines for the townhouses and the self-storage facility. So although staff finds the provision of affordable housing to be a public benefit that's put forward in the comprehensive plan, there's two chief concerns that we have that prevent us from recommending approval of this application to you all. First, the design guidelines that are submitted for this application, in staff's opinion, are inadequate to ensure that the goals of the comprehensive plan are being met. So the portion of Richmond Road that abuts this property is designated as a community character corridor within the comprehensive plan. And one of the goals of the county is to ensure that community character corridors are preserved and enhanced by development that are highly visible. The second concern staff has is that the proffered phasing of this project does not align with the county's mixed-use construction phasing policy. The purpose of this policy is to ensure that for mixed-use development, residential uses are not developed incongruently with commercial and other non-residential uses. So therefore, staff does recommend that the Planning Commission recommend denial of this application to the Board of Supervisors. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have, and I believe the applicant is here as well to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Ms. Leverance?
Do we have a schematic of what the mini storage facility is going to look like, or what the buffer would look like?
So there is a 50-foot buffer that's shown on the master plan.
I saw that.
Okay. And the applicant provided design guidelines, but we don't have building elevations.
We don't know what that buffer would look like.
It would be planted to the county's landscape ordinance standards, but there's not a typical cross-section, or there's not an illustrative.
I'm used to seeing kind of a schematic of what a facility would look like, and since it's right there next to a community character corridor, I think that's pretty important.
Hello, good evening. So I think I know the answer, but double checking. The amenities that we see proffered here, such as the playground, those will be shared with the single home residential next door, or is that?
The intent of the pocket park that's being put forward on the master plan is that that will be for the folks who are on the Salvation Army. So it's not intended to be shared with the Forest Heights neighborhood.
Right, thank you.
I've got a couple questions. Is with the diagram that you have up there and looking at the master plan, they don't jive. Because the houses that border 60 are only go back about maybe a quarter of the way, but the rest of the property in the back there, if I look at your master plan, is part of this property. Is that not correct?
Beth, would you mind?
The red is this,
Okay.
and the thing next to it is.
All right, so then the clarification that is on the master plan, and whether or not it's for you or for the applicant, is in the future development area. Where is that?
The future development area is it's the portion of the property. There's 5 residential lots.
This right here.
And going back to the initial master plan for the rezoning, that area has always been planned for future development.
Okay, so I'm still back to the diagram that you have here. Outside of the red plan, is what you're doing is showing me that the future development is on the other side of that red line.
Correct. Those are those very, the map is now back up on the screen. Those are those very long, narrow lots that exist to the west of the area in the red outline.
Exactly. And so they end, the property line ends for those residential areas somewhere about a quarter of a way back from Richmond Road. No. Okay, so somebody please show me where exactly the area labeled future development is on the map.
So the highlighted, if I can get the mouse to work here.
Should click on it.
There we go. So this is the subject property. This is where the townhouses are going to be back here. The self-storage facility is planned for right here. And then on the master plan, it does show future institutional use being located back here.
That part of the master plan,
That was part of the original 47.1 acres that was rezoned by the county for mixed-use development. The townhouses and the self-storage facility for this application are going to be within this map, within the red
who
boundaries.
owns the future area?
These 5 property owners do.
Separate from there.
Okay, and so I'm just trying to make sure when I look at the master plan and I'm looking at AIJX, whatever that means, what that is. Okay, that clarifies that. The other one on the frontage piece and the specifications that you have for that 50-foot buffer is I noticed that the entrance into the Forest Heights, I guess, which is the Phase 1, the area that borders Route 60 is an open area, and it was labeled on the master plan for that as a playground area. Whose responsibility is that?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'd have to check the HOA documents to see.
And
who's
is it
responsible.
susceptible to the same standards of the buffering for the corridor as the applicant is?
That's a good question. I'd have to get back to you on that. My focus was mainly on the subject property and the facilities that were proposed there. But
And then the last question I have is, when I look at attachment 7, which is the Proffer design schedule, can you specify to me which ones belong to the townhouse versus what belongs to the storage facility?
yes, the
So I know that the garage doors are white, or the townhouses versus whatever the doors are going to look like in the storage facility.
Be on the other side of that. That's the storage facility.
That's it?
Yeah.
I believe there's a single sheet for the self-storage facility.
Yeah, I didn't even see. Okay, great. I got my question answered. Thank you.
Mr. Polster, and just to clarify your earlier question on the existing requirements for that CCC buffer. So remember the area to the east of the red line, so kind of coming south or down on this map for those purple areas. Remember, that was a redevelopment of an existing neighborhood. So there were existing homes and existing lots in there. So unlike the Salvation Army property that is effectively a greenfield site that's not yet been developed, that because of the existing homes and those existing streets in that Forest Heights neighborhood in that area, it wasn't possible to come in and clear all those out to reestablish that 50-foot buffer, since that was a redevelopment project. So that's why you're not seeing or would not see that consistent 50-foot buffer extend eastward.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay.
But the thing is labeled on the master plan as a playground, and if it would have been developed as a playground, you would have seen some buffering type things that are in there, or something to that, and so that you'd at least have a consistent view to meet the suburban, urban Route 60 corridor buffer that you're asking for. Okay,
Again,
that's the
it
reason.
was because of that redevelopment context on those portions.
So the question still remains, who owns it, who's responsible for it? Because there isn't a homeowners association.
It might be the county. We can look into that and see. I know
Wouldn't be
that,
surprised.
yeah.
If I remember correctly, it was designed to be for the newly developed homes, there would be a mandatory HOA, and for the existing homes, it would be voluntary for them to join it. So there is a blended HOA there, if I remember correctly, from that application, so.
There is, and unlike some of the other more traditional newer developments in the county, there's also a blended partnership there. I think the county owns and maintains that BMP, and so in terms of the common open space, there really isn't a whole lot there except to maintain some of the common areas and to cut the grass.
Thank you.
I have a question. You have 3 objections to this application. One of them is the fiscal impact, but the other 2 are, have to do with county policies and guidelines. Can you, or can the applicant describe exactly why they can't comply with the design guidelines and the construction phasing?
I believe that would be a question best answered by the applicant.
Would the applicant mind addressing that, or do we wait for the
They
hearing
want to
for
wait
that?
until the public
Okay,
hearing.
thank you.
They may be covering that anyway.
Good deal. Okay. Other questions?
Just one clarification. So the proposal is to delete Proffer 6 on the Salvation Army property, so all the stormwater would be maintained by, I'm assuming, the commercial and the HOA? Is that,
Yes, it would be whoever ends up owning the property.
that would just be the standard maintenance agreement that the county has with the property owners? Okay.
And I was wondering, just if Mr. Halavin, while we still got staff here, if you wouldn't mind just sort of a brief synopsis of how, we can still have a cash proffer in this day and age with the new state law.
New legislation regarding the cash proffer, the ordinance, I think it was 31A-304 that the board passed, applied to residential rezonings after July 1, 2016. This application is actually a master plan amendment and proffer amendment from a previously approved legislative case. So it does not trigger the new ordinance that the board passed in response to the state law.
Thank you, Mr. Halavin.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, before we transition to a different part, I did want to confirm, I was sitting here checking to Mr. Polster's earlier question. So those common area parcels that are within the existing Forest Heights neighborhood, including that pocket park that fronts on Richmond Road, are maintained and owned by James City County. We'll retain that ownership. Again, that was that partnership redevelopment project.
What I thought. Thank you.
Any disclosures? Thank you, Mr. Weissman.
Thank you. Yeah, I spoke with Mr. Getty on the phone briefly.
Anybody else? Thank you. With that, we'll open the public hearing. Mr. Getty.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I'm Vernon Getty of 1177 Jamestown Road. It's my pleasure to be here tonight representing the applicant, Wayne Harbin Builder. Doug Harbin with Wayne Harbin Builders here, and Chase Grogg with Landtech Resources. You may be familiar with Wayne Harbin Builder. It's a family-owned small business headquartered on Strawberry Plains Road, formed in 1985 by Mr. Wayne Harbin. It's now run by his sons, Doug and Brad. At the end of my remarks, Doug would like to address you all directly regarding the company and their work here in and with the county. As we discussed, the property is 11.42 acres and is owned by the Salvation Army. Staff has described the existing mixed-use zoning on this property, and I'll observe this is a very unusual mixed-use zoning district. I don't think this was ever intended to be a traditional mixed-use development like we probably think of them, a new town or something like that, with a variety of commercial uses, a variety of residential units and that sort of thing. Our understanding is the county selected the mixed-use district to take advantage of the flexibility afforded in setbacks in other areas so the improvements and redevelopment of Forest Heights could work. And it has. It's been a great success. The Salvation Army has decided they're not going to build on this site. The development contemplated by the existing master plan is not going to take place. The applicant is building in the first phase of Forest Heights and saw this as an opportunity to provide a quality workforce housing townhouse project in this location that is in search of a new use. Here's the overall project, phase one being here, the Salvation Army project we're discussing tonight right here. And this is the portion of these lots that were subject to the existing master plan and rezoned in 2011. And what's confusing is this is a zoning line, not a property line.
Thank you.
The applicant's proposing 46 townhouses on just under 7 acres and a self-storage facility of up to 250 units on just under 3 acres. Just a word on how we got to a self-storage facility there. The original submittal in this case actually called for a 40-unit senior living facility and a small 6,000 square foot commercial building on the 3 acres. Unfortunately, the mixed-use zoning requires an 80-20 split between non-residential and residential uses. And to meet that split, this entire 3 acres needs to be put to a non-residential use, or you don't comply with the ordinance. The applicant looked at it and believes that the self-storage is an economically feasible, low-impact use for that part of the property that the applicant would build itself. Here's the master plan, and there's the buffer along Richmond Road, sidewalks and trail system, park, and the townhouse units themselves. We agree with much of the staff report. This is a project that's consistent with the land use and density provisions of the comprehensive plan. Project will increase the supply of quality, for sale, and affordable housing in the county. As staff mentioned, 100% of the homes will comply with the HOP policy and will help meet the pressing need in the county for quality, affordable housing. Project has no adverse impacts on surrounding development and zoning. There are no traffic issues. It's consistent with the county's Parks and Recreation Plan. Provides pedestrian connectivity. There are no cultural or environmental issues. As staff mentioned, the applicant is offering cash proffers in accordance with the applicable county proffer policies. And finally, the project meets the adequate public schools facility test. I told Doug, typically when you read that list of positives, you get to the end and you see staff recommends approval. There are 2 issues here, obviously. The mixed-use construction phasing policy. The applicant has offered a proffer that's a good faith attempt to address phasing while still leaving the project financeable and viable. In response to your question, Mr. Haldeman, a small business like Wayne Harbin Builder simply can't obtain financing for both the townhouse and the self-storage project at once and build them simultaneously. It's, and particularly with the townhouse being potentially limited, a lender is highly unlikely to lend. Possibility at some point early on in the project, it could grind to a halt. So that's the issue, the practical issue there that Doug's facing. But here we submit, given the unique nature of this mixed-use zoning in this particular project, that a strict application of that policy is neither necessary nor appropriate. and would point out that the existing Phase 1 of the project was developed with no phasing requirement, is entirely residential, and is just under 60% of the project. We're also not aware of any other project that's been developed in compliance with this policy in the county. Bringing us to the appearance of the self-storage unit, Doug put together brief guidelines for that. It was a fairly late change in this process, providing for the brick ends of the buildings facing Richmond Road, attractive brick columns and metal fencing that will be combined with the landscaping and the buffers and consistent colors with the townhouses. Staff mentioned in the report that the height limit for these would be 35 feet. I want to point out that these are one-story. These will be one-story units. There possibly would be one small place where it would be 2 stories, where the caretaker's apartment might be located above the office, and that would be back where the entrance into the facility is, not right up against Richmond Road. So, you're talking about low-level buildings. And keep in mind, he has every incentive to make these attractive since it's at the entrance to his townhouse project. With that said, he's happy to work with staff between now and the board meeting to make reasonable improvements to the guidelines and produce a elevation. His problem is he is at the end of the rope with his time limits under his contract with Salvation Army and cannot afford to delay any further. He'll lose the project entirely. So with all that said, we would submit to you that the positive aspects of this project outweigh the issues, and he is happy to work with staff and earn a recommendation approval from them between now and the board meeting. But with that, we would ask you to forward this to the board with a recommendation of approval. And then speak.
How y'all doing? I'm Doug Harbin, Wayne Harbin Builder, 202 Landon Road. I want to first start out by giving you some background about our company and what we've done with affordable workforce housing throughout James City County. We as a company were chosen back in 2008 to be a part of the Ironbound redevelopment project to build homes for first-time home buyers that were affordable but still maintain quality. Since that time, we've built a total of 7 homes in Ironbound Square, are currently building on the final lot in this redevelopment project. The project's been a great success for the county and a lot of wonderful people that were able to get first-time home ownership. We've also built a home, Toanna Trace, a home in Forest Heights, and just completed a home on Neighbors Drive, which is, I believe, to the southeast of this project. We have Forest Heights Road and then Neighbors Drive. And we're currently have another under construction there. And these houses we're building these houses in co-op with the county. In addition, we also have done over 5 help projects with the county to improve our communities, working with grants provided by the county to fix up homes for low-income homeowners. Since 2006, we partnered with Habitat for Humanity to build 5 new homes. As a company, we realize the importance of affordable housing and first-time home ownership. With that in mind, we saw an opportunity to continue the effort with this project on the Salvation Army site. Once the project at Neighbors Drive and Ironbound are complete, I believe there would be no more new home projects on the books for the county. Given that, I feel that this project would be beneficial to fill in a gap and allow us to work with the Office of Housing and Community Redevelopment on applicants seeking new homes. Salvation Army property was part of a rezoning that included 47 acres. This project was intended to help bring the existing property into compliance with the zoning ordinance and improve the Forest Heights neighborhood. When the rezoning took place, the county did not have the phasing policy in place. The phasing policy is difficult for small builders or developers to adhere to since the financial obligations have become so strict in obtaining financing for development. This mixed-use designation only allows for builders or developers that have unlimited funds to take advantage of a mixed-use zoning. We've asked the planning staff for other projects that have been required to adhere to this phasing policy. It is our knowledge that there are no other projects at this time that are required to adhere to this policy. We have made every effort to comply as best as we can, but feel it would be very difficult to do both residential and storage buildings at the same time. Storage buildings were proposed based on the commercial aspect of the mixed-use zoning policy. The thing about, I first went and started working with staff back in 2017. So this isn't something that I just sprung on in the last, month or two. This was a very, very complex rezoning when it took place. So it really took a lot of time and effort to really figure out what we can do. The Salvation Army is not going to be there, and an option to even rezone this property to PUD is not an option, because by rezoning this 11 acres, then it knocks what already has been built out of compliance with the mixed-use zoning. So we're locked in to mixed use. So there has to be some type of commercial aspect that goes along with this. We are in agreement this would be the best commercial use to do the neighborhood types setting of this project. This creates less traffic with the storage units and can be concealed with landscape buffers. We're proposing brick columns with a fence between an increased landscaping buffer. The ends of all the units facing Richmond Road will have brick, which will blend into the surrounding settings. I was up here probably about 13 years ago for a SUP for a car wash, and one of the biggest concerns were, how it would look. If you go by what we've done on Richmond Road with the Colonial Car Wash and the enhanced landscaping that we did, it really turned out to be a nice facility. I feel that with the storage units and what we're proposing, the brick, not only that we're not trying to build a brick wall or a brick barrier, we want something that looks nice, and we certainly want to work with staff to be able to come up with the best design we can. I think you'll see once the plantings are in place, you're not even going to see, since these are going to be one-story buildings, you're not even going to see these units right off the bat. Salvation Army has decided to relocate to another site. It's our belief that we can come up with a great plan which encompasses the vision of the county to help revitalize the neighborhood while creating more affordable housing. I feel we've met the intent of the mixed-use zoning for the property. The positives of this project surely outweigh the negatives. With that said, I ask the board to vote to approve this application.
Thank you very much. Questions of the Ms. Leverance? Yeah, sorry.
Could you explain again why a rezoning of this whole multi-property could not be requested? In other words, why not rezone Forest Heights altogether?
Chase Grogg with Land Tech Resources, 7657 Turlington Road, Towano, Virginia. It couldn't be rezoned because since this was originally done with 47 acres, multiple property owners, many, this property sits in the middle. And so with discussion with staff, we talked about doing it, but they decided that you would have mixed use, so the existing Forest Heights Neighbors Drive, then you would have our property, another zoning, and then you would have those 5 properties, the long skinny ones, that would also be mixed use. So in discussions, it was determined that it would not look, it would be weird on a map to have mixed use, something else mixed use, as well as there's also the 80%, 20% residential, commercial.
So rezoning phase 1 is out of the question.
I don't think you could rezone that at this point.
Everyone would have to.
Yeah, each property owner would have to sign off on it, and you would have all
I see.
the problems that led you to the mixed-use zone and with setbacks and all sorts of other issues would then rear their ugly heads again.
Okay, so is it fair to say that this self-storage unit is likely to be the only commercial, non-residential use on this master plan?
I couldn't predict that.
It looks to me like the, what's left, in those long, I mean, getting to that
Exactly.
is going to be tricky.
The only potentially feasible thing would be something other, similar to self-storage, some low impact that requires no visibility and.
And another access somehow onto Richmond Road so that it wouldn't have to go down, down the.
Our property, we're leaving a.
We're leaving
there's an
accesses.
I
For the
saw that.
connectivity, so there wouldn't be, theoretically, there would potentially not be another, the entrance added there was per the traffic impact study done when the original master plan was done, they did more than they were required to do. So theoretically, they would go through our, I'll say our site and not put another entrance out where those 5 lots are.
What I'm envisioning is someday down the road, application for additional residences down there, because it just isn't properly suited for commercial.
But it has to be commercial. There's no, with the 80-20 split, well, actually, since we're putting commercial in the front, they could rezone it, yes. It would have to be another SUP to take that out of being future commercial.
And that's what I was just gonna say, like, rezoning probably off the table, but, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess this is for staff, but through an SUP, the Board of Supervisors would have the authority for this block of land to let the commercial, not to require the commercial. Is that a true statement?
No, by ordinance, that mix has to be in there. The phasing policy, however, is just that, is a board-adopted policy. That portion could be set aside, but you'd have to rewrite the ordinance in order to have that not apply.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Harbin, you said something in relationship to this question that Ms. Lawrence asked, and you used the acronym PUD, and you were talking about disconnecting the Phase 1 and the commercial. What did you mean by that acronym?
I mean, planned unit development, it's a different but similar zoning district to mixed use.
So what's the relationship? I missed the relationship then, that you couldn't rezone this because of the PUD?
No.
Okay. You couldn't
Because of
rezone it because?
We're basically stuck with the existing mixed-use zoning because you couldn't rezone the master plan area.
All right, let me move off of that. I've got some questions on the proffer piece. I don't know who that would be addressed to.
I'm happy to
But I'm
take a
trying
shot
to
at it.
understand the language in the proffer in terms of the 46 units that are total, and that by the HOP policy, X number percent has to be there. And in your proffer, it sounds like you're going to have 8 of them for sure that will comply with the HOP at, I guess, 30 and 60 and 80 and whatever?
The 3 tiers, and 4 will be definitively will be in the 2 lower tiers, and the rest of them, at worst, would be in the upper tiers, potentially in all 3 tiers.
That's what I'm trying to clarify. I think it says that then the rest of them will be in the 81-20. So that
No, it
means that
says it's the 30-120. It's the whole, anywhere within the policy was for the rest of them.
I think the language in the proffer is not clear to me on that. It makes it sound like you're going to do 80, 120 for 38 of the units.
That's not the intent.
That's why I was asking the question, to try to clarify it in my own mind. The other follow-on to that was that there's also, it says rental or procurement of the house itself. If you went to a rental, and I don't know that you leave that open in your proffer, what would the rental be in terms of the HOP?
I don't know the amounts. I mean, there's a calculation under our HOP policy that gives you the rents you're allowed to charge to be in those ranges.
Well, it runs to the 30 to 60, 60
Right.
to 80, 80 to 120.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to ascertain is in terms of affordable housing versus workforce housing, because you use the word workforce housing in the proffer in that 80 to 120. I'm trying to figure out how many of those units of the 46 or 38 are going to be in the 30 to 60 or 60 to 80.
Yeah, the
That which is
proffers
affordable
guarantee you, in accordance with the policy, there'd be 4 units, at least 4 units in the lower tier, 4 units in the middle tier.
Right.
The rest of them could be in any of the 3 tiers.
And that's not clear to me in the proper language that I saw. And I'd like a clarification from the lawyer then on, as to what that's going to be.
The proffers are, as Mr. Getty stated, it's 4 guaranteed in the lowest tier, 4 in the middle tier, and then the remainder of the units would be anywhere in that 30 to 120.
The follow-on the storage area is a caretaker house that's inside the storage area. What is that going to look like? It says 2-story, I guess.
It will be a 1-story unit that sits on top of the office, I think is the plan. But
Right,
go ahead,
yes, sir. We're looking at doing a 1-story just on top of the office. It's going to be on the back side of the storage unit where you would enter from the back side. And again, it's just a caretaker place. It's going to be small, basically 1 bedroom.
So if this thing goes for you, offer to do an elevation of the storage area and the caretaker house would be visible then on your elevations?
That would be included, yes.
Okay, I think that's it for me.
Mr. Harbin, I'm sorry to get you up again. Could you roughly describe your intentions for phasing? Where would you start and how would you progress?
What we were, we would certainly come in and get the main backbone of the road in throughout the project. Then what we would do is start work on the townhomes, and what we said we would do once we get to 75% of the townhomes, then we would shift back over and work on starting the first unit of the self-storage buildings.
And how many units of the storage, I know it's in here, I've forgotten, how many separate buildings on the storage?
We had a generic layout, and we took it off the master plan just because, we're looking at a max of 250, but I believe it was five buildings.
5 buildings, that's what I was asking. Okay, great. So you do 75% of the houses and then one of the 5 storage buildings? And then what?
Once we got to 75%, I'm hoping that, typically that's about the range where you've paid back your development loan and where you can then apply to do another development loan for the self-storage units. So what we'd like to do is transition in and start the first building and then just build the whole storage facility out. It doesn't make sense to just build one. We want to keep going.
So you build the 5 storage units and then go back and build the 25% remaining homes, or would you do them at the same time? Or
We would probably do those at the same time, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Harbin, before you sit down, just understanding from staff that they recommended a 2-story type storage facility, so something more vertical than horizontal. You speak to that? I mean, is that something that you all could consider doing as a portion of the project that fronts Richmond Road versus just doing the 5 horizontal buildings?
Well, let me clarify staff's intention too. I wouldn't want anyone to read in too literally that it needed to be that a 2-story structure. I think just as a prototype thing, that is a form of a mini storage that is more internally focused and could be 1 story, some are 2, could be 1, but it does not have that same form of the separated linear buildings. It's looks more like one
Like an
unit
office
or
building,
one building
so-
or an
right.
office building. It doesn't, I wanted to make that distinction. We were not at all advocating that it had to be a two-story.
No, understood. I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to imply that. I just know that was part of a discussion. So, just, I think many of us are concerned about this being two things. One, a community, and two, a community character corridor. So, obviously we have this master plan, to me, is the community piece that we need to focus on. And also just for the greater community of James City County, having frontage, that is attractive on Richmond Road. So I just didn't know if that had ever come up in your all's planning, to maybe do the front a little more vertical and then maybe do 3 horizontal buildings behind it or anything along those lines.
No, I mean, we could certainly consider it. We just felt that a lower lining building, with the extensive landscaping and the fencing would fade in to the landscaping as you're coming down Richmond Road a lot better than a 2 or 3 story building. I know that, some parcels, they're doing these, they're very tall and they look very, just again, I've got to be able to sell the townhome, so I certainly, I want these storage units to look the best they can, because again, we're having to drive by those and the residents that are going to end up living in the townhome. So, our thought was just to keep them lower and keep them behind the landscaping with the brick, and certainly they would just kind of fade. If you actually look at that site, the Richmond Road, right off the road, there's a little bit of a dip, so it's the front of that property is a little bit lower than the backside. So again, we just figured that it would fade into the whole the whole plan, and it would be a positive.
Thanks.
Following up on Mr. Haldeman's question, and you had said, I believe earlier, that doing both the self-storage and the townhomes simultaneously would not be financially viable. Why would it not be possible to do the self-storage unit first and the townhome second?
I mean, if I had my choice with this property, it wouldn't even have a commercial aspect, because that's, we've been working with the county. I've worked with Marion and Vaughn, I've worked with Rick, and again, we've been helping do these community projects and building homes for people. So really, that's what this project is for us, is a continuation of Forest Heights and Neighbors Drive and Ironbound, the Ironbound redevelopment project. So, we're having to do the self-storage building based on the zoning requirement, rather than really what our focus on is affordable housing.
With respect, that really didn't answer the question, though. Would it be financially viable to build the commercial property first and then use the revenue from that to partially support the housing loan?
Well, I mean, to answer the question, in my perspective, no. I mean, you've got to, just like any business, it's taken us a long time to get to where we're at in any type of business. If it's self-storage, the thing about the townhomes and the sales is we're creating revenue every time we sell a unit. With the storage facility, we have something sitting out there, and hopefully in 8 to 10 years or 4 to 5 years, whenever it may be, we fill it to capacity, and then we're generating revenue at that time. So it's not a revenue generator.
Will you own the storage facility?
Right. we would certainly like to own the storage facility.
That
I
answers,
certainly.
I got it. That answers the question. Okay, thanks. To me, it does anyway. Anybody else? Any other? Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you. Disclosures. Okay. That will open the public hearing. Speakers cards. We have an opportunity to address this issue. Speakers have 5 minutes to speak. The applicant has 15, although I think that's passed. The first speaker card I have is Mr. Wayne Harbin.
Wayne Harbin, 4041 Coronation. We would just like to tell you that this project's going to be a neat project. We're very anxious to be able to do this in James City County. As Doug has told you, we've been involved with giving back to the county with doing habitat and workforce housing, and to be able to we built a lot of nice, beautiful homes in this county. And it's our representation to give back to the county. And it's, as Doug has talked about, there's some considerations that we're in the building business of residential and not so much in the storage business. So, but it comes along with a lesser impact for the county not to have to supply any money that we can see. And this goes forward and meets the zoning that you'd like to see on that piece of property. I know I've been a part of Neighbors Drive and some of the workforce housing we've done, and either north and south of this piece of property. With what we're going to do is going to very easily impact and beautify that side of the corridor of that piece of property where it sits. We're finishing up 26 units in the city of Poquoson, and it has, in that, we had the same situation with a piece of commercial property in the front of it, and we put the townhouses behind it. It wasn't a affordable type townhouse, but it was townhouses, and it turned out beautiful. It was, and I wish we had, looking at this piece of property, everything looks so blah and not in retrospect of once it's built. But the one-story application on these storage buildings, with you're trying to put a buffer on that corridor, I think it's going to enhance with a one-story better than a two-story. And as we all get older, we don't want to go up steps. We want to be on a one-story if we possibly can. And storage is a big consideration. But getting back to the fact, we hope that you go in our direction. We would love to take and do this for the county. It's our responsibility to give back to our constituents. It's allowed us to build in this county since 1985. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next speaker, Lieutenant Jeremy Lind.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lieutenant Jeremy Lind. I'm with the Salvation Army of Greater Williamsburg. We wanted to let you know that the Salvation Army has decided not to build on the Richmond Road property. We decided instead to sell the property. We wanted to stand here. We have a number of board members here as well. We support Doug Harbin and Wayne Harbin Builders in the master plan that he has before you. We understand that he wants to provide affordable housing for the county, and that is something that the Salvation Army can get behind as part of our mission as well. We understand the need for mixed use, and it's my understanding that the storage units at the front will be a low traffic area, will not have much of an impact on that as well. So we just wanted to say that we support Mr. Harbin and Doug Harbin Builders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gary Moore.
Evening. My name is Gary Moore, 158 Forest Heights Road. While I'm not here to oppose what Mr. Harmon's doing, Mr. Harmon did walk through the neighborhood and spoke to everyone, and I appreciate that. My only concern is the traffic for Forest Heights Road. How much traffic will this create? And, you know, could it possibly be I heard everything you said earlier, but the interest and all, but could it possibly be an interest off of Route 60 instead of having the traffic come down Forest Heights Road? The letter was, got the letter, the surprise was the mini storage on there, but I heard what happened there, that he has to try to put some commercial part in that. That's fine, but my biggest concern is Forest Heights Road and the traffic that it will create. That's pretty much all I had to say.
Thank you very much. Next speaker card, Mr. Brian Maynor.
Hi, I'm Brian Maynor, 4079 Dunbarton Circle. I'm here simply just to show support for this project. I've heard a little bit about it, and I think that it'd be a great benefit for the community. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. With that, we'll close the public hearing. Yes, sir. That's okay. I was remiss in not asking. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is William Pritchard, 4005 Coronation here in James City County, Williamsburg address. I would like to speak on behalf of this proposed project. I think it's wonderful if we could have more affordable housing in this area for people who work here or want to live here, and especially those who have children here, that to be able to attend the wonderful schools we have in this area. And I think the fact that the Harbins are willing to step forward with the quality of the construction that they do and step forward and do this project speaks an awful lot for them. It also, I think, is a very, very high interest for the county to approve such. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to speak with this? Yes, sir.
My name is Jerry Howell. I'm 3000 Earls Court. I am a board member of the Salvation Army Advisory Board, and was a part of the board when we acquired this property some years ago. And we had grand plans of things we could do there. It turned out that that's not been feasible, and as a consequence, we need to move on and have moved to other location, to have a permanent location on Ironbound Road. The thing, I understand that there are all kinds of issues and so forth, and it's a very difficult development area to deal with. But if it's not done, I would look that I'm not sure what can be done. And if the fine work that the Harbin people are doing is not qualified or not satisfactory to the county to improve this whole area, then I'm not sure what could be. And the land will probably remain unsold for a long period of time, which will be obviously detrimental to the well-being of the Salvation Army mission in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? And I really will close the public hearing. Discussions?
I'll start it off. I remember seeing Mr. Harbin come to the DRC almost a year ago with this property, and I had some concerns about being able to see the commercial piece of it, and wondered if there couldn't be a rezoning piece to that. So I was very happy to hear that there was an effort to try to make it rezoning, to try to figure it out. there's no doubt in my mind about the quality of work that he has done in the county on affordable housing. I mean, his record is there. I did hear the comment from the gentleman here about the parking, and one of the things that concerns me about that Forest Heights Road is that it's narrow. And even though it meets the VDOT thing, I meant to ask whether or not, since we have a stipulation within the other area of no parking on the streets at the fire department, whether or not that would apply to the Forest Height roads. Because when you get a car parked on that Forest Heights road, that's where you start to get some real difficulty, especially with the entrance, the second entrance that goes to the back of the townhouses that gets in there
Forest Heights Road is already in the VDOT system for a state-maintained roadway, and as such, I do not think there's a prohibition against on-street parking there.
I think that's a concern that I have, because I mean, when I drove through that road, I was hard-pressed to see how a fire truck was going to get there if there was a road, a car parked on it. And so I just asked that we kind of take a look at that concern because of the congestion. The other thing that I had a concern of with it is the way the buffering is between the townhouses and the existing one-story homes that are on the other side there. There's not a whole lot of room in that thing, but being able to see the landscaping in there and seeing that buffer against the neighbors on that in the back would make me feel a little bit more comfortable. I'm sure that'll happen at the site planning piece for it. I'm okay with supporting this project with some of the stipulations that we've talked about. I'm not sure about the language, especially about the phasing piece, about what the percentage staff would feel comfortable with in terms of the construction of the townhouses versus the percentage of the storage areas for that. And I also would feel comfortable about the design guideline piece if there were the elevations and some, in those elevations, some idea of what the sidings would look like, the fencing would look like, what the height of the caretaker's house would look like, with some kind of a perspective of where that would be located, et cetera. So I wouldn't have any problem with seeing the staff continue to work before the next Board of Supervisors meeting to try to come to some agreement on those design guidelines that we've talked about this evening. And as again, I also would like to see some staff discussion on the phasing piece of what makes sense. I do understand the financing piece of that and trying to get some cash flow coming into the thing so that you can continue to pay it, move forward with other things that you are. So I don't think that that's an unreasonable request for us looking at some kind of an exception for the phasing that makes sense to everybody.
Certainly from staff's perspective, we would be more than amenable to sitting back down with the applicant, trying to flesh out some of those architectural details on the mini storage. I mean, there's certainly architecturally some ideas in there to get at some of the concerns that the commission has, sort of the screening and separation from some of those existing uses. I'm not sure staff would be able to meet those specific expectations for further trying to refine or negotiate the phasing piece. The way that the board's adopted policy reads, it's fairly prescriptive. I wouldn't feel comfortable as staff negotiating a board policy. I think for that would be within the realm of the board to do, and staff's analysis and recommendation would provide that piece about whether or not the application and the submittal materials met that expectation or not. I think ultimately that would be something that the applicant would need to take up directly with the board. I didn't want to commit to something that I'm not comfortable doing, since it's not a staff policy, it's a board adopted policy.
The commission could make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that they consider an exception to the phasing policy.
Or that what your potentially mitigating factors may be as you consider and make your recommendation from your perspective.
I would second that in terms of providing additional details, elevations, buffering information about the self-storage unit. Is it true that there are no other projects in the county that these phasing guidelines have applied to?
So we did that analysis. I'm going to Gonna make sure Mr. Wysong keeps me factually correct. As we went back and looked through the rezonings that have occurred since the adoption of the mixed-use phasing policy, I think we found that there were three, as it was applicable to the creation of new residential dwelling units and as it applied. Of those three applications for rezoning to mixed use, I think one was a Proffer amendment for Newtown. The other one was that Colonial Health building down there in Grove. That was no new construction, so that the phasing policy wasn't applicable. The one mixed-use application that did apply was the Promenade there at Williamsburg Crossing. And there, as part of the staff analysis, staff found that one of the mitigating factors or extenuating circumstances that was unique to that development in creating the new residential was the existing shopping center, which more than met the intent and more than met the square footage requirements that were expected as part of that mixed-use policy, even taking into account the vacant stores that were vacant at the time. There was enough square footage there when considered as one master plan development for that to apply.
So in this case, not only will there be a variance from the phasing plan, but also a variance from the 80-20 requirement for mixed use.
No, again, without changing the zoning ordinance, there could not be a deviation from that 80-20 split. It would be whether or not there would be some accommodation to either set aside or make a modification to that phasing policy about when that non-residential piece came online.
So how is it not a deviation from the 80-20? Because the undeveloped portion would have to be commercial?
Because it takes that into account. When you look at the master plan in total, it preserves that split.
But, and that undeveloped land would not have to be developed as non-residential before this residential component could be built?
And it's a relationship to the number of units and the square footage of the commercial. It's that ratio that needs to be met per the board's policy.
Okay. So the square footage of the self-storage area is 20% of the entire Forest Heights residential master plan?
The 80-20 split is looking at the entire 47.1 acres of the original rezoning, and the future institutional use that's planned for this back portion here on the property accounts for a certain percentage of the non-residential use.
And that is not required to be developed in order for all of the rest of these residential units to be built?
Staff took it that that would be a later development. It's still part of the greater master plan, but.
That's okay. That's not part of this phased requirement.
Correct.
That doesn't factor in.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. This project has so many good things going for it, but I do have a concern about inadequate, incomplete information on the self-storage component, and I'm just not comfortable recommending approval for a deviation for existing policy. So on that basis, I'm just not going to be able to support it.
So as far as the phasing goes, I'm not too terribly concerned about that, and I guess here's why. We're dealing with a local business, been around quite a few decades. They've done good work all over, really all over the peninsula, but especially here in the county. And you know, I'm buying the economic argument that it's hard to understand this not starting with the self-storage for economic reasons that were explained earlier by the applicant, but also because that's not the game they've been in as far as building all these years. So I understand kind of sticking with what you know to kick off the project. I have good faith that something can be worked out between now and when the board sees this case as far as elevations of the storage facilities, and I think that will go a long way towards, an agreement with the county, with planning staff. I think that's achievable. I do want to throw out there something that we haven't really talked about, but I think my fellow commissioners, we've seen a pattern here lately of the new developments in this region, residential, and the number of school children, and we keep seeing the same school potentially negatively impacted and having too many enrolled, and it's Norge Elementary. So just to keep that on our radar here. And I did think that the estimate of 7 school children seemed rather low, but what do I know? So I think with all that being said, I actually am inclined to support this and letting the phasing. I'm not worried about the phasing here, and it's just it's a strange case. I mean, it's really too bad, because I just don't think that there really needs to be commercial here in this lot, but it looks like we're stuck at that point, and I do hope to see this property transfer hands. I think it's good for the county to have more affordable housing, and Salvation Army as well, and the Harbins. So that's where I am.
If we were to recommend approval to the Board of Supervisors, could the Board of Supervisors say we don't have to have any commercial on this property? Could they do that?
That's what I was asking earlier, and I think because it's written into the ordinance, the wiggle room doesn't exist.
Couldn't set aside the 20%. They could modify a policy, the phasing piece.
But they can't issue a waiver for an ordinance?
Not without amending the ordinance.
Right.
I came here this evening looking for reasons to support this, and I've basically found them. Just as everybody has said, so far there's far more good in this application than not. If we do recommend it to the county, I would like to have the assumption or the condition that the elevations be drawn out in some detail, including the types of material and the colors and so forth, to go along with it. But I just think it's a good project. It's in the right place. It's been on the county's radar screen for 8 years, and I think its time has come. With regard to Mr. Schmidt's comment on schools, I found something that I thought was interesting. We had a workforce housing case here a year plus ago at Oakland Point, and I went back to the application, and the table that we also have tonight for Norge Elementary School, effective capacity is 695. Their enrollment at the time was 583, and the projection for enrollment plus the projected students was 600. The enrollment projection that we have today is 702. It's only 15 months later. I think that's stunning to me. And Oakland Park hasn't been built yet. The other thing I did, because I'm a masochist, I went back and took some of the numbers in the Workforce Housing Task Force report. The average negative fiscal impact in this project is just over $1,000 per unit. The average negative fiscal impact in Oakland Point was $3,675. I'm not sure why the difference, but it is. But if you take some of the projections from the Workforce Housing Task Force, requirements for workforce housing in this county, what they represent as needed workforce housing, and multiply it by either of those two numbers, you get a real blood-curdling negative fiscal impact annually. That doesn't have anything to do with this case. I plan to vote for this case, but it does really emphasize that this subject has to get into the comprehensive plan. There has to be a plan for this, or have a real problem in this county over time.
So one of the discrepancies between Oakland and this property, I think, is because there's a lot of cash proffers here that offset some of that. I mean, that doesn't necessarily, yeah, in the commercial. That's a good point.
Well, I just used the housing number. The $48,000 was the housing net fiscal income.
That's interesting.
Can I ask a clarifying question of the staff? So connectivity to those 5 western parcels, is that a requirement of VDOT or to have connectivity between adjacent properties, or is that just a nice thought to have?
It is a VDOT requirement.
So the action shown on the plan will be there and remain there?
Yes, also because too, this is a binding master plan. And so, you know, one, from a county point of view, these connections would be binding as part of that binding master plan. When the original master plan was developed, you know, sort of this transportation network was taken into account when they did the traffic impact study. Certainly for more residential or even for future non-residential, Forest Heights Road aligns with that existing curb cut in Richmond Road, which would prevent some other entrants from creating U-turns there as they go east and west on Richmond Road. And, you know, as mentioned, that is a part of a VDOT expectation as well. So it does have access management benefits to meet the county's expectations as well as VDOT's.
So I think Mr. Moore, was it? So I think part of that would help alleviate some of your concern if once those more western parcels get developed, there will be another entrance in to the townhomes. So
not necessarily. So the master plan does not currently envision another curb cut or another entrance being put out onto Richmond Road. So I say that to say that this entrance here at Forest Heights was master planned with that additional development all in mind, and it was determined that this intersection improvement, that width of that road, that design, were all sufficient to handle the anticipated traffic volume.
So there's no expectation when those 5 adjacent parcels are developed as part of this master plan that there'd be a curb cut to Richmond Road?
No, and at some point it might even be determined that would be inconsistent with the master plan because that has not been built into this and then presumably would not have been taken into account as part of that initial traffic impact analysis.
So potentially we're going to put, well, we will put more traffic on Forest Heights.
Yes, but again, going back to that original master plan
with the
Salvation Army piece, that amount of traffic was factored in, and that would ultimately prevent, because that through connectivity has been planned for, because that intersection has been planned for with that growth, that would prevent then those additional 5 properties coming in and potentially requesting 5 different new curb cuts and those types of things. Now, with that said, there's some existing curb cuts there to serve the existing residential. Those don't have to be removed, but for any future institutional or non-residential growth that occurs on that consistent with this master plan, the expectation of this master plan and those legislative approvals would be all of that traffic would come in and use Forest Heights Road.
Thanks, that's what I wanted to clarify. So.
Looking at the master plan, fairly soon after you come in Forest Heights Road, there will be a road, a right-hand turn to service the storage facility, is that correct? And then,
correct.
But that also continues on into the townhome development. So some of the traffic from destined for the townhouses, in fact, I would think a good deal of it, will not reach the residential section of Forest Heights Drive, I think. At least it looks that way on the map.
The streets are interconnected. Do we have a master plan? Streets are interconnected. Does provide more than one way out instead of necessarily going through all the way down the existing residential street.
Any other comments, sir?
I just think I would offer, we see this often, and I appreciate what the Harbins have brought to the table, trying to make this 80-20 mix, and make it work as part of this development and be in keeping with a community. What I think I find most disappointing as we go into this is when we saw this application several years ago, we were told that, oh, we're going to have a Salvation Army facility here, there's going to be a playground here, it's going to be available for the folks in Forest Heights to be able to use it, so we don't need to have a playground in Forest Heights. So again, it's part of the trend that we're seeing that, we're approving these master plans, and then ultimately at the end of the day, we're not ending up with what was conceived. And again, I think for me, the struggle I'm having with this application, while this meets the spirit and the intent, I'm struggling with the 24-foot wide street, the no parking on the street, only 2.5 parking spaces. I recognize that meets all of the ordinance. I think in mixed use, it also says the commercial will, be, a supportive use of the residential. I'm not sure that self-storage is necessarily a supportive use here, other than some of the townhomes may not have garages and will need a place to store stuff. I know that sounds flip, but I also don't see a commercial use of retail going in here, knowing that just up the road we have a ton of vacant retail space. So, I don't know what the good commercial use is for this site. So, I really don't know where I end up on this today.
Well, I think where we end up is we need a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve MP 18-004 / Zulu 19-0007 Forest Heights Master Plan and Proffer amendments with the following provisos: that the staff and the applicant will be able to meet before the Board of Supervisors hears this case, to be able to go through the design requirements and guidelines, as well as suitable elevations for the storage facility. I also recommend that we recommend to the Board of Supervisors that the phasing policy for this project be set aside or modified that would allow both the economic development of the residential as well as the completion of the storage facility.
Any further discussion?
Is that the applicant willing to do that?
Is the applicant willing to do that?
Thank you. Mr. Holt, please call the vote.
Ms. Leverins?
No.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt?
Aye.
And Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Good luck, Mr. Harbin. Good luck.
On to the Planning Director's report. Mr. Holt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Other than what's been provided in the agenda packets, don't have anything new or additional to add this evening, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Seeing none, Planning Commission discussion. Board of Supervisors coverage for May 9th, Mr. Schmidt.
Yep. Batter up.
Anything else?
I will not be here for the June Planning Commission meeting. I will be here for the June Policy Committee meeting.
Yeah, we need to, so I've sent emails out. I'm going to be missing that too. Brother's getting married then, so we'll have to make sure we have
Sounds like a
a
flimsy
quorum.
excuse to me.
Make sure we have, yeah, terrible excuse. Yeah.
I'll try to round up,
Yeah.
try to round up 4.
Oh, we need 5, don't we? Yeah, including stuff, yeah.
Anything else? No. Motion to adjourn?
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.